In a town that time seemed to have forgotten, nestled between rolling hills and a meandering river, lived a woman named Eleanor. She was a fixture of the community, known for her quiet demeanor, her impeccably tended garden, and the way she always seemed to have a kind word or a knowing smile for anyone who needed it. Eleanor lived a simple life in a small, sturdy house on the edge of town. Her days were predictable, filled with the rhythm of nature and the gentle hum of a life lived deliberately. She gardened, she read, she occasionally went into town for supplies, greeting people by name, a soft, almost unseen presence. To look at her, you might see just another elderly woman, her face a roadmap of a long life, her hands calloused but gentle from years spent in the earth. There was a certain stillness about her, a calm that spoke of deep roots, but little suggested any hidden strength. This unassuming presence was deliberate, cultivated over decades. Eleanor craved peace, a quiet retirement after a lifetime that had been anything but quiet. Her past was a closed book, its pages filled with chapters of intensity, danger, and responsibility that the tranquil town could never have imagined. The town itself was generally peaceful, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children played freely in the streets until dusk. But shadows were beginning to creep in, thin at first, then bolder. A new group had arrived, or perhaps more accurately, had consolidated their presence and grown arrogant. They called themselves the Syndicate, a name far too grand for their initial petty crimes, but one that reflected a growing ambition and a cruel, casual disregard for others. They were mostly young men, full of bluster and a sense of entitlement, led by a hulking figure named Marcus, whose sneer seemed permanently etched onto his face. They started small, loud parties that disturbed the peace, minor vandalism, intimidating kids at the park. The townspeople, unused to conflict, mostly turned a blind eye, hoping the problem would resolve itself, or that these troublemakers would simply get bored and move on. Fear was a subtle current at first, just below the surface, but it was growing, fed by the syndicate's escalating boldness and the lack of any meaningful opposition. Eleanor watched from her quiet corner, her eyes missing nothing, the stillness in her masking a growing unease. She saw the fear in her neighbors' eyes, the way they averted their gazes when the syndicate's beat-up cars rumbled past. She hoped, truly hoped, that it would not touch her, that her quiet life would remain undisturbed. One afternoon, the tranquility of Eleanor's quiet street was shattered. Three figures, identifiable by their swagger and the crude skull symbol painted on their jackets, sauntered down the road. They carried spray cans, their movements jerky and aggressive. They weren't just passing through, they were looking for trouble, for a target that seemed easy, harmless. They spotted Eleanor's fence, a simple wooden structure that bordered her meticulously kept yard, its surface a clean, inviting canvas to their destructive impulses. Laughing loudly, they approached, oblivious to the elderly woman tending to her roses near the porch. One of them, a skinny kid with a shock of dyed hair, began spraying a jagged symbol onto the fence. Another joined in, adding crude words. Marcus, the leader, stood back slightly, arms crossed, a look of bored satisfaction on his face, overseeing his minions' vandalism. The loud hiss of the spray paint was a violation, a screeching insult to the peace of the street. Eleanor stood up slowly from her knees, wiping dirt from her hands. Her movements were unhurried, almost deceptively frail. She watched them for a moment, her expression calm, unreadable. The laughter and the spray continued. They hadn't noticed her. She picked up her small gardening trowel, turning it over in her hand. It was a simple tool, caked with earth, but her grip on it was firm. She walked towards the fence, her footsteps light on the grass. She stopped a few feet away from the one actively spraying, cleared her throat gently. The kid froze, startled, the spray can hissing a final, accidental burst onto the wood. They turned, their faces shifting from arrogance to annoyance at being interrupted by, as they saw it, a harmless old lady. "That's my fence," Eleanor said, her voice soft, yet it carried an unexpected weight, like river stone. Marcus stepped forward, a smirk twisting his lips. "Yeah, old lady? And?" Looks better now, doesn't it? Needed some color. The other two snickered. The kid with the dyed hair took a step closer to Eleanor, puffing out his chest. Beat it, Grandma. We're busy. Eleanor's gaze swept over them, calm and steady. There was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet disapproval that seemed to irk Marcus more than any shouted protest could have. You've made your point, she said, her voice still low. Now, you will clean it off. Immediately. Marcus threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Clean it off? You hear this, guys? The old lady wants us to clean her fence. He turned back to Eleanor, his smirk replaced by a look of contempt. How about this instead? We finish the whole fence, then maybe teach you some manners. He took a step towards her, raising a hand, not to strike, but to push, to shove her aside like an obstacle. That's when the shift happened. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, but instantaneous, like a light being switched on behind her eyes. The stillness in Eleanor didn't break, it intensified, becoming the stillness of a coiled spring. Her body language didn't change drastically, but the subtle shift in her weight, the way her shoulders squared almost imperceptibly, the absolute focus in her gaze, it was the language of someone who had moved through conflict their entire life. As Marcus's hand came towards her, Eleanor moved. It wasn't a block or a clumsy push. It was economical, precise, almost impossibly fast. Her small, dirt-stained hand shot out, not towards his arm, but towards his wrist. Her fingers clamped down, finding a specific point, and twisted with startling strength. Marcus yelped, his arrogant posture collapsing as his hand was forced into an unnatural angle. Before the sound fully registered, Eleanor's other hand, still holding the trowel, didn't strike, but used the handle in a quick, sharp movement against another pressure point near his elbow. It wasn't hard enough to break bone, but it sent a jolt of incapacitating pain up his arm. He staggered back, clutching his arm, his face contorted in disbelief and agony. The other two skaters gaped for a second, their bravado dissolving. The dyed-haired kid, reacting with raw instinct, lunged towards Eleanor. He swung a wild punch. Eleanor didn't dodge, she shifted, moving into his space. Her shoulder dipped slightly, redirecting his momentum just enough. Then, her foot swept out, a low, swift arc that caught his ankle. He tripped, sprawling onto the grass. The third skater, seeing his two companions disabled in mere seconds by an elderly woman, hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes locked onto his. She didn't say anything, didn't make a move, but the sheer, unwavering intensity of her gaze, coupled with the sight of his leader clutching his arm and his friend face down on the lawn, was enough. His bravado evaporated entirely. He dropped his spray can, his hands instinctively coming up in a gesture of surrender. Marcus, still hobbled, stared at Eleanor, panting. His eyes, usually full of disdain, were wide with shock and something akin to fear. He had never seen anything like it. This wasn't just luck or a surprising shove. This was skill, practiced and lethal. The kid on the ground groaned, pushing himself up, favoring his twisted ankle. I asked you to clean it off, Eleanor said again, her voice back to its soft cadence, yet now carrying the undeniable weight of capability. Now. Get your things. Get cleaning supplies. And when you are finished, you will apologize. To me, and to this fence. Marcus stared, then looked at his pained arm, then at his sprawled subordinate, then back at the serene, yet utterly formidable, woman. The arrogance was gone, replaced by grudging fear and humiliation. You broke my arm, he stammered. No, Eleanor said calmly. But I could have. You will clean the fence. He hesitated, a flicker of defiance in his eyes, but the pain in his arm and the cold, unwavering resolve in Eleanor's gaze extinguished it. He gritted his teeth, nodding curtly. Fine, he mumbled, grabbing his spray can. He limped towards their waiting car parked down the street. "Go get the stuff," he barked at the third skater. The dyed-haired kid, rubbing his ankle, scrambled to his feet and followed Marcus, the third one trailing behind, casting nervous glances back at Eleanor. She watched them go, her expression remaining calm until they were out of sight. Only then did a sigh escape her lips. The peace was broken. The quiet life, perhaps, was over. The next morning, the three skaters stood awkwardly in front of a judge. Not Judge Thompson, the usual circuit court judge, but a stern, no-nonsense magistrate named Judge Evans, who had a reputation for cutting through nonsense. How they got there so quickly was a mystery to them. One minute they were nursing bruises and humiliation, facing the demand to clean a fence, the next, a crisp summons arrived, seemingly out of nowhere, demanding their presence in court. Eleanor had not pressed charges of assault or vandalism, not in the traditional sense. Instead, she had called someone. Someone who knew how to make things happen quietly, efficiently, and with surprising speed within certain systems. The charges weren't serious criminal offenses, not yet. They were regulatory violations, disturbing the peace in a manner that implied intent to intimidate, minor property defacement with malicious intent, and resisting a lawful request to cease activity, framed around their initial refusal to leave or clean. These weren't headlines, but they were enough to bring them before a judge known for imposing stringent community service and behavior modification requirements. Marcus tried to bluster, to explain that an old lady had attacked them, that they were the victims. Judge Evans listened patiently, her eyes sharp and intelligent behind her spectacles. When Marcus finished his indignant rant, she simply looked down at the reports. "Mr. Marcus Thorne," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The report states you were observed defacing private property and refused to desist when asked. It also notes evidence consistent with minor altercations, but the complainant, a venerable member of this community, has chosen not to pursue charges related to physical contact, instead requesting a focus on civic responsibility and deterring future nuisance." She paused, looking over her glasses. "Frankly, Mr. Thorne, I find your explanation unconvincing." The report from the observing officer, who arrived shortly after the incident, noted spray paint cans in your possession, fresh paint on the fence matching the cans, and 3 young men appearing remarkably subdued and in possession of minor, self-inflicted, or perhaps accidentally acquired, injuries consistent with clumsy falling. She let that sink in. The 3 stood there, heads hanging, the arrogance of the previous day replaced by sheepishness and resentment. Judge Evans imposed hefty community service hours, mandatory counseling focused on anger management and respect for community property, and a significant fine to be paid to Eleanor for the cost of the fence restoration and labor, beyond what the boys would be required to clean. The most impactful part, however, was the judge looking directly at Marcus and stating, "Any further incidents involving you and Mr. Thorne, or your associates, and Mistress Eleanor Vance, will result in this court taking a much closer look at any and all available statutes, Mr. Thorne. You understand me?" Marcus swallowed hard and mumbled a "Yes, Your Honor." The skaters left the courthouse, defeated and bewildered. They had expected a slap on the wrist, maybe a small fine. They hadn't expected to be taken seriously, or for an old lady to have such quiet, effective means of recourse. Their plan for immediate revenge against Eleanor was put on hold, replaced by the immediate, pressing need to perform humiliating community service and figure out how to pay their fines. Eleanor watched them clean the fence the next day, under the watchful eye of a bored county deputy who seemed to find the whole situation highly amusing. They scrubbed and scraped, their earlier vandalism now a source of deep shame and aching muscles. When they were finished, the fence looked almost new. Marcus, after prompting from the deputy, mumbled an apology, avoiding Eleanor's eyes. His companions did the same. Eleanor simply nodded, her expression kind but firm. "Respect," she said softly, "is earned. This is a start." The incident of the fence and the swift, unexpected consequences echoed through the syndicate. An old woman had put 3 of their own, including their leader, in front of a judge and forced them into humiliating labor. It bruised Marcus's ego terribly. He felt disrespected, undermined. His initial shock at Eleanor's skills morphed into anger and a festering need for retribution. This wasn't just about some fence anymore, it was about dominance, about proving that no one, especially not an old woman, could challenge the syndicate and get away with it. What Marcus didn't know was that his casual act of vandalism had triggered something far older and more dangerous than he could comprehend. Eleanor Vance was not just an elderly woman with a quiet life. She was, in fact, Eleanor Vance, call sign, Sparrow, formerly Colonel Eleanor Vance, United States Air Force, retired. Her hands, calloused by gardening, had once flown supersonic jets and guided covert operations. Her quiet demeanor masked the strategic mind of a highly decorated officer and a formidable operative forged in the crucible of countless conflicts. Her retirement was a deliberate attempt to leave that world behind, to find peace in the mundane beauty of nature. The fence incident was not just an annoyance, it was a breach of the perimeter, a violation of the sanctuary she had built. And Marcus Thorne, with his petty cruelty and inflated ego, had just kicked a sleeping grizzly bear. Marcus and his gang began to escalate their activities, not just against Eleanor, initially, but across town, as if to reassert their dominance. They vandalized other properties, roughed up a store owner who refused to pay protection money, and openly dealt drugs near the school. They were testing the boundaries, pushing harder, watching to see if the town or its mysterious protector would respond. The fear in the town grew, palpable now. People were afraid to go out after dark. Businesses considered closing down. The syndicate's power seemed unchecked. Eleanor watched all of this. The news reached her through quiet conversations at the market, the worried looks on people's faces. Her initial hope for peace was fading, replaced by a familiar, cold certainty. This wasn't going away on its own. Marcus and his kind only understood one language, consequence delivered with overwhelming force. She knew that if she didn't act, the town would be consumed by fear and corruption. The idea of returning to the life she had left behind was painful, a weight on her soul, but the alternative, allowing innocent people to suffer, was unacceptable. She started subtle inquiries, using contacts she hadn't spoken to in years, quiet whispers down secure lines that had once buzzed with strategic intelligence. She needed to know who Marcus really was, who was backing him, and the full extent of the syndicate's operations. This wasn't just about graffiti and petty crime, her instincts screamed there was more here. The syndicate was becoming too bold, too organized for just local thugs. This level of disregard required either deep-seated arrogance born of impunity or the backing of something larger. The answers she received were disturbing. The syndicate wasn't just a local gang, they were a front, or at least trying to become one, for a larger criminal enterprise moving into the territory, looking to establish a new distribution hub for narcotics and other illicit activities. Marcus, for all his bluster, was a mid-level enforcer trying to impress his superiors, a man given just enough power to be dangerous but not enough sense to use it wisely. The intelligence indicated that the syndicate was expecting a large shipment soon, the success of which would solidify their control over the town and make them a permanent, dangerous presence. This confirmed Eleanor's fears. This wasn't just about getting her fence cleaned, this was about saving the town. She couldn't do it alone. The syndicate was too large, too connected. She needed help, the kind of help only people with similar backgrounds could provide. People who understood strategy, discipline, and how to operate outside the usual constraints. Her thoughts turned to a different kind of contact list, one etched not in databases, but in shared memories of close calls and unwavering loyalty. She thought of Sergeant Major Silas Rock Riley, retired Army Special Forces. She had served alongside him in a joint task force years ago. He was gruff, formidable, utterly dependable. There was also Captain Anya Sharma, a former intelligence officer known for her sharp mind and ability to move unseen. And Major Thomas Doc Miller, a former combat medic whose gentle hands could stitch a wound or incapacitate a threat with equal precision. They were scattered now, living their own versions of quiet lives, but they were bound by a shared past, a code of honor, and an understanding that some calls couldn't be ignored. Making those calls was perhaps harder than facing down Marcus. It meant pulling them back into the world they had left, asking them to put their peace, perhaps their safety, at risk. But she trusted them implicitly, and she knew, deep down, they would answer. Her call to Silas Riley was brief, to the point. "Silas. It's Eleanor Vance." A pause on the other end, a surprised cough. "Sparrow? Well, I'll be. Haven't heard from you in what, 15 years? Something like that, Rock. I need help. There's a problem here. Town's being bullied by some thugs tied to something bigger. They crossed a line with me." A low chuckle. "Crossed a line with you, Sparrow? Poor bastards. What do you need?" "Intel suggests a major shipment coming in soon. They're trying to lock down this town. They need to be stopped. Permanently." Another pause, shorter this time. "Send me coordinates. I'll make some calls. We're not as young as we were, but the rust isn't that thick. Doc still owes me a 20 from that poker game in Kandahar. Anya will probably calculate the optimal travel route before I hang up. Give me 72 hours. Understood, Rock. Be safe. Always am, Sparrow. You just keep that spine straight." Calls were made, encrypted messages sent. The old network, dormant but not dead, began to stir. Silas, Anya, and Thomas weren't just bringing their skills, they were bringing their own connections, their own quiet influence, accessing resources and information channels far beyond what local thugs could imagine. Meanwhile, the syndicate, emboldened by the lack of immediate, formal police intervention, local law enforcement was either outmatched or, as Eleanor suspected, compromised, became more overt in their control. They set up informal checkpoints on roads leading into town, harassing anyone they didn't recognize. They leaned harder on businesses, demanding higher protection payments. They started recruiting more young people, selling them on a false sense of power and belonging. The atmosphere in town grew heavy with oppression. Marcus, still smarting from his humiliation, decided to send a message directly to Eleanor. He didn't dare go to her house himself after the first encounter, but he sent a group of his enforcers. They arrived in the dead of night, smashing the windows of her greenhouse, spray-painting crude threats on her house walls, much worse than the fence. They slashed the tires on her old station wagon. It was a brutal, petty act of vandalism and intimidation, designed to terrorize her, to make her feel vulnerable and alone. Eleanor found the damage the next morning. She walked slowly through the shattered glass of her greenhouse, the ruined plants within. She ran a hand over the hateful words on her wall. There was no panic, no tears, only a profound sadness, quickly followed by a cold, focused rage. They had attacked her sanctuary. They had underestimated her resolve. This wasn't just business anymore, it was personal. Tell us, where are you watching this story from? Knowing where our stories reach across the globe is always fascinating. And if you are finding yourself engrossed in Eleanor's unexpected battle, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to you every day. Plus, we have a very special episode planned for tomorrow that you absolutely don't want to miss. The arrival of Eleanor's allies was as understated as Eleanor herself. Silas "Rock" Riley showed up first, not in a tactical vehicle, but on a battered touring motorcycle, looking like a grizzled biker on vacation. He was a mountain of a man, even in retirement, with hands like shovels and eyes that missed nothing. Thomas "Doc" Miller arrived shortly after in a nondescript sedan, appearing like a quiet history professor, though his movements were precise and efficient. Anya Sharma took longer, her arrival unannounced and unnoticed until she simply appeared at Eleanor's door one evening, having slipped into town like a ghost. She was slender, with an academic air, but her gaze was sharp and constantly assessing. They gathered in Eleanor's living room, the scene bizarrely domestic, teacups on the coffee table, Eleanor's knitting project on a chair, contrasting sharply with the conversation. Maps of the town were spread out, intel reports, photos of syndicate members. "All right, Sparrow," Silas rumbled, leaning over the map. Anya's confirmed the intel. "Big shipment coming via truck, 3 days from now, likely hitting a warehouse near the old industrial park on the north side." Estimated size of the syndicate crew involved? 20, maybe 25 bodies, plus whatever muscle is riding with the shipment. Anya added, her voice quiet but precise, "They're using a patchwork of local guys and some imports. Marcus Thorne is the visible head here, but the real handlers are from the larger network. The local sheriff's department is underfunded and possibly compromised. We can't rely on them for the initial takedown." "Casualties?" Doc asked, running a finger along the map. "Risk to civilians?" "Minimal civilian risk at the warehouse site, it's isolated," Eleanor replied. "The bigger risk is them retaliating against the town if we move on the shipment. We need to hit them where it hurts most, decisively, and make it clear this town isn't worth the trouble. We also need to sever the connection to the larger network, show them this branch is rotten." "So, a multi-pronged approach," Silas said, nodding. "Disrupt the shipment, neutralize their local command and control, send a message up the chain." "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. "Marcus and his key lieutenants are usually at that bar, the Rusty Mug, downtown." "Anya, can you confirm their patterns?" "Already have," Anya replied. "They congregate there most evenings, especially the night before a major operation. Heavy security presence inside and out, but they're complacent, arrogant. Predictable." "Good," Eleanor said. "Here's the plan." Their strategic planning session was a masterclass in coordinated action, honed by years of high-stakes operations. They discussed entry points, escape routes, contingency plans. Eleanor, despite her calm demeanor, was clearly in charge, her mind sharp, her orders clear and concise. Silas provided insight on direct action and brute force requirements. Anya offered tactical infiltration and surveillance details. Doc focused on minimizing harm and ensuring quick resolution of any physical confrontation. The stakes were higher than ever. The intelligence suggested the incoming shipment wasn't just drugs, it included weapons. If the syndicate consolidated power with that kind of arsenal, the town would be truly lost. And the larger criminal network they were connected to was ruthless, known for extreme violence against anyone who interfered with their operations. Moving against them meant putting targets on their backs, targets that wouldn't disappear easily. As they finalized the plan, there was a moment of quiet reflection. They were retirees, pulled back into a world they had tried to leave behind. "Sparrow," Silas said, his voice softer than usual. "We don't have to do this. We could call in assets. Higher up. Make it someone else's problem." Eleanor looked out the window towards the darkened town. "They targeted this town, Rock. They targeted my home. These people are my neighbors. My friends. They're living in fear because of these thugs. We have the skills. We have the chance to make a difference here, directly. Sometimes, the cavalry isn't coming. You are the cavalry." Doc nodded, a quiet intensity in his eyes. "She's right, Silas. We didn't sign up to stand by when we can help. This is our town now, too, in a way." Anya simply gave a brief, resolute nod. Her commitment was silent but absolute. Silas looked at each of them, then back at Eleanor. A slow smile spread across his face, revealing a flash of the warrior beneath the retiree persona. "All right, Sparrow. Let's go to work." The resolve in the room solidified, a quiet promise of action against the encroaching darkness. The implementation of Eleanor's plan began subtly, almost unnoticed. Anya, using her infiltration skills, began disrupting the syndicate's communications, feeding them misinformation, making their operations just slightly less efficient, sowing seeds of paranoia amongst the lower ranks. Small, seemingly random glitches, missed messages, late arrivals, unexpected detours, began to plague the syndicate's daily routines. Silas and Doc focused on reconnaissance and isolating key players. They weren't seen, but they were everywhere, observing the syndicate's movements, identifying the locations of their muscle, noting vulnerabilities. Doc, despite his unassuming appearance, possessed an uncanny ability to blend in and gather information through casual interaction, leveraging local gossip and observation. Silas, the imposing figure, served as a silent deterrent, his mere presence felt by those attuned to danger, making syndicate members subtly uneasy when he was nearby, even if they couldn't place him. Their initial successes were small but strategic. They disrupted a street-level drug deal, not through a direct raid, but by causing a diversion that scattered the buyers and sellers just as the exchange was happening. They misplaced a shipment of weapons intended for the syndicate, making it look like an internal theft, further fueling mistrust within the ranks. These actions weren't violent, but they chipped away at the syndicate's operations, making Marcus and his lieutenants nervous and prone to mistakes. The syndicate, feeling the pressure, began to lash out wildly. They suspected internal leaks, rivals, anything but a small, highly skilled group operating against them. Their retaliation was brutal and indiscriminate. They beat up a man they suspected of talking to outsiders. They torched a small diner that had quietly refused their protection demands. They increased their patrols, their presence on the streets more aggressive and menacing than ever. Fear spiked in the town, but alongside it, anger was simmering. This brutality, however, had an unintended consequence. It pushed the townspeople past the tipping point of passive fear. Seeing their neighbors attacked, their livelihoods destroyed, galvanized them. The quiet courage that Eleanor embodied began to spread. People started talking openly, sharing information about syndicate movements. They started looking out for each other. The owner of the torched diner, a man named Frank, refused to be intimidated. He set up a donation jar, and the townspeople, surprising even themselves, started contributing, helping him plan to rebuild. A group of older men, former military themselves though not the elite level of Eleanor and her team, began quietly organizing neighborhood watch patrols, armed with nothing more than flashlights and cell phones, but signaling a newfound resolve. This groundswell of community support was exactly what Eleanor had hoped for. It wasn't just about defeating the syndicate, it was about restoring the town spirit, empowering the people to stand up for themselves. It also provided valuable intelligence. Local residents reported syndicate movements, storage locations, and patterns of behavior that even Anya's advanced methods couldn't always pick up. The allies weren't just Eleanor, Silas, Doc, and Anya, they were the people of the town, finding their courage. One evening, Eleanor received a call from the principled local law enforcement officer she had cultivated a quiet relationship with, a young deputy named Miller, no relation to Doc, who had quietly been working against the corruption from within the department. Deputy Miller had managed to obtain the precise time and location for the incoming shipment drop, midnight tonight at the abandoned steel mill just outside of town. This was the information they needed. The clock was ticking. The final plan was set. Eleanor, Silas, Doc, and Anya would intercept the shipment at the steel mill. Deputy Miller would handle coordination with the clean elements of county law enforcement, ensuring they arrived after the initial takedown to secure the scene and handle arrests, thus minimizing the risk of compromised officers interfering. Meanwhile, a carefully orchestrated distraction, involving anonymous tips about minor syndicate activities elsewhere in town, would draw away some of Marcus's available muscle, leaving him and his key lieutenant slightly less protected at the rusty mug. The true confrontation would happen at the steel mill, but Eleanor had a secondary objective: deal with Marcus directly, but on her terms. He needed to face the consequences of his actions, not just legally, but personally, understanding why he had been defeated. The plan was complex, high risk, but designed to hit the syndicate simultaneously at their most vulnerable points, their supply chain and their leadership. As night fell, a tension settled over the town. The air felt heavy with anticipation. The syndicate members, jumpy from the recent disruptions, were on edge. The townspeople, knowing something was coming but not what, waited with a mixture of fear and cautious hope. Eleanor and her team moved into position, slipping through the shadows towards the abandoned steel mill, their movements silent, precise, ghosts of warriors long dormant, now awakened. The abandoned steel mill was a skeletal behemoth against the night sky, a maze of rusting metal, dark shadows, and echoing sounds. It was the perfect location for a clandestine exchange, isolated and providing countless hiding spots. Eleanor, Silas, Doc, and Anya approached from different directions, using the cover of the industrial decay. Radios were silent, communication handled by subtle hand signals and practiced intuition. Silas took point, his massive frame surprisingly agile as he navigated the treacherous terrain, identifying optimal entry points and potential threats. Anya was the ghost, flowing through shadows, placing surveillance devices and noting the positions of syndicate lookouts. Doc moved with quiet purpose, assessing the layout, identifying potential choke points and safe zones. Eleanor directed their movements from a slightly elevated position, her eyes scanning, processing, formulating the real-time adjustments to the plan. They located the syndicate waiting area, a group of men huddled around a meager fire in a collapsed section of the mill, stamping their feet against the cold. They were armed, vigilant, but also bored and overconfident in their isolation. The shipment truck was expected any minute. 3 sentries on the perimeter, Anya whispered over the comms, a barely audible sound in Eleanor's ear. 10 inside, maybe more waiting in vehicles outside the main gate. Truck is 5 minutes out. Silas, Doc, neutralize the perimeter sentries, Eleanor responded, her voice a calm murmur. Quietly. Anya, prepare to intercept the truck before it reaches the main rendezvous point. Disable it. Do not engage personnel unless absolutely necessary. We hit the crew inside once the truck is stopped. The operation unfolded with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Silas, a master of silent takedowns, moved like a shadow despite his size. 1 sentry was pulled into the darkness, silenced instantly. Doc handled another with practiced efficiency, a swift, disabling strike rendering him unconscious. The third was Anya's, a blend of stealth and speed. Anya then peeled off, a dark shape moving through the industrial debris, heading towards the access road. She identified the large, unmarked truck rumbling towards the mill. As it slowed for a rough patch of road, she emerged from cover, quick as thought. A small, dark object arced through the air, attaching itself to the truck's underside. A moment later, a subtle hiss confirmed the tires were rapidly deflating. The truck groaned, listing violently, before grinding to a halt just shy of the main gate. Inside the mill, the syndicate crew heard the commotion, shouts carrying on the night air. They were startled, confusion rippling through them. What was that? One yelled. Marcus wasn't present, he was at the bar, awaiting word, a deliberate choice by Eleanor to separate the head from the body. Go check it out, barked a hulking figure, one of Marcus's lieutenants, clearly in charge here. 2 men moved towards the entrance. This was the signal. Eleanor gave the command. Execute. Silas and Doc burst from cover, moving with surprising speed, their movements economical and devastatingly effective. They didn't use firearms initially, their objective was to subdue, to incapacitate, to sow chaos and panic. Silas was a force of nature, breaking formations, delivering strikes that ended fights instantly. Doc was a whirlwind of precise movements, targeting pressure points, using the environment to his advantage. The syndicate crew, expecting rival gangs or perhaps hesitant police, were utterly unprepared for the speed, skill, and aggression of the attack. They were thugs, bullies, used to overwhelming weaker opponents with numbers and brutality. They were facing trained operators, individuals who had faced down far worse in far more dangerous places. Their initial confusion turned to panic as they realized they were being systematically taken apart. One of the lieutenants managed to get off a few wild shots, the noise echoing deafeningly in the mill, but the bullets went wide. Eleanor, observing from her perch, chose her moment. She descended, moving with the surprising agility that had characterized the fence incident, but now amplified, fluid, dangerous. She didn't engage the main group. She moved towards the other lieutenant, who was trying to rally the panicking men, shouting orders. He was a beefy man, armed with a shotgun. As he turned, Eleanor appeared seemingly out of nowhere, low and fast. Her hand snaked out, seizing the barrel of the shotgun, twisting it sharply away from her, simultaneously stepping inside his guard. Before he could react, she used the weapon itself against him, not firing it, but using the stock in a sharp, upward thrust under his chin. His head snapped back, his eyes rolling, and he crumpled to the ground, the shotgun clattering away. Within minutes, the organized resistance collapsed. Several syndicate members surrendered, throwing down their weapons. Others tried to flee into the vast, dark structure, but Silas and Doc were relentless, cutting off escape routes, subduing them with non-lethal force. Anya, having disabled the truck, ensured the men inside remained contained, using tactics of psychological intimidation and exploiting the chaos within the mill. By the time the Clean County deputies, led by a relieved Deputy Miller, arrived, lights flashing, sirens muted until the last moment, the scene was under control. Syndicate members were zip-tied, the large shipment of narcotics and weapons secured. Eleanor and her team had vanished back into the shadows, leaving only the subdued thugs and the disabled truck as evidence of their intervention. Deputy Miller took charge, efficiently processing the scene, ensuring the evidence was properly handled and the prisoners secured, preventing any internal leaks or sabotage. While the takedown at the steel mill was happening, Marcus Thorne and his remaining loyalists were celebrating prematurely at the Rusty Mug, unaware of the disaster unfolding. They were fewer than usual, their numbers depleted by the men sent to the mill and those drawn away by Anya's distractions. The mood was boisterous, arrogant. Then, the door opened. Not with a bang, but quietly, deliberately. Eleanor walked in. She wasn't in tactical gear, she wore simple slacks and a jacket. Her hands were empty. But the air around her shifted, becoming charged with an unseen power. The raucous laughter died down. All eyes turned to her. Marcus, seated at a central table, scowled. Well, Marcus sneered, recovering his bravado. Look who it is. The fence lady. What, here to complain about your windows now? Sent your little court friend after us again? His men laughed nervously. Eleanor walked further into the room, her gaze sweeping over them. She stopped a few feet from Marcus's table. It's over, Marcus, she said, her voice calm, carrying across the now silent room. Your shipment has been intercepted. Your men at the mill are in custody. The larger network knows this operation is compromised. You're done here. Marcus stared at her, disbelief warring with sudden, cold fear. How could she know that? How could she have done that? You're bluffing, old woman, he snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. He gestured to his men. Get her. 4 men rose, approaching Eleanor, hands going inside their jackets. I wouldn't do that, Eleanor said softly. One of them lunged, reaching for her. Eleanor moved. Not with speed this time, but with almost leisurely precision. As his hand came out, her own darted forward, not to block, but to strike. A quick, sharp rap against his wrist. He cried out, stumbling back, clutching his hand, dropping something metal that clattered on the floor. Another one tried to grab her. She stepped aside, using his own momentum to spin him, and a quick, open-handed strike to the back of his head sent him sprawling into a table, sending drinks flying. The remaining two hesitated. They had seen what she did to Marcus that day at the fence, and this was somehow more terrifying, more deliberate. "You rely on numbers, Marcus," Eleanor said, not even looking at the downed men. "On intimidation. On the assumption that people are weak. You don't understand real strength. It's not about how many bodies you can throw at a problem. It's about skill, discipline, and conviction." Marcus stood up, his face red with fury and shame. "Conviction? I have conviction. I take what I want. This town is mine." He grabbed a heavy glass bottle from the table. "No," Eleanor said, her voice hardening, losing its softness. "This town belongs to the people who live in it, who built it, who care for it. People like Frank, whose diner you burned. People like my neighbors, who you terrorized. People like that deputy, who upholds the law you think you're above. And people like me, who have defended things that matter against bullies like you for a very long time." Marcus roared and threw the bottle at her. Eleanor simply shifted her weight, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and the bottle shattered against the wall behind her. Before Marcus could grab something else, Eleanor moved. 3 quick steps closed the distance. She didn't punch or kick. She used techniques honed for disabling opponents quickly and cleanly. A strike to the solar plexus, a swift jab to the side of the neck. Marcus gasped, his eyes wide with surprise and pain, the fight draining out of him instantly. Eleanor caught him as he fell, guiding him roughly to the floor. His remaining men, utterly demoralized and terrified, stood frozen, watching their leader defeated with such apparent ease. "The police will be here shortly," Eleanor informed them, her voice now back to its quiet authority. "You can resist and be arrested the hard way, or you can surrender quietly. Your choice." One by one, heads bowed, they dropped their weapons. Silas, Doc, and Anya, who had quietly entered the bar during Eleanor's confrontation with Marcus, moved to secure the surrendering syndicate members, their presence a silent, powerful reinforcement. Deputy Miller arrived moments later with a team of clean officers, securing the bar, Mirandizing and arresting Marcus and his remaining crew. The syndicate's reign of terror in the town was over. In the immediate aftermath, the town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The fear that had gripped them for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative hope. The abandoned steel mill was swarming with law enforcement, the massive drug and weapons shipment confiscated. The Rusty Mug was cordoned off, Marcus and his lieutenants facing serious federal charges in addition to local ones, thanks to the scale of the seized shipment and the connections revealed by Anya's intel. Eleanor, Silas, Doc, and Anya weren't publicly acknowledged. They preferred it that way. They were shadows, operating outside the spotlight, ensuring justice was served when official channels were insufficient or compromised. Deputy Miller, however, was hailed as a hero, instrumental in the takedown, and his actions paved the way for a much-needed internal investigation and cleanup within the local law enforcement. Over the next few weeks, the town began to heal. Frank's diner was rebuilt, better than before, thanks to community donations and volunteer labor. People started walking the streets again, children returned to the parks, laughter replaced the hushed whispers of fear. There was a renewed sense of unity, of shared purpose. The syndicate members who were just misguided youth, not deeply involved in the worst crimes, were given community service, counseling, a chance at a different path, overseen by stern but fair probation officers guided by Judge Evans's earlier mandates. Marcus Thorne and his core group faced the consequences of their actions. Their arrogance and cruelty had led to their downfall. They learned, too late, that underestimating people, especially those who value peace but are capable of defending it, is a catastrophic mistake. They stood before judges again, this time facing sentences commensurate with the scale of their crimes. Eleanor returned to her quiet life, her garden blooming again, the fence pristine. The shattered greenhouse was repaired, the new glass glinting in the sun. Her car had new tires. Life in the town felt different now, lighter, more vibrant. The people weren't just relieved, they were empowered. They had faced a threat together, and they had won. Silas, Doc, and Anya stayed for a little while, helping ensure the syndicate's remnants didn't try to regroup and that the larger network understood this territory was now protected. They blended in, enjoying the peace they had helped restore, before quietly departing one by one, returning to their own lives, their own versions of retirement, but knowing the network was still there, ready if needed. Eleanor walked through her garden one afternoon, the scent of rain-kissed earth in the air. She paused by the fence, running her hand over the smooth wood. It was just a fence, but it represented a line drawn, a stand taken. She hadn't wanted to return to the person she used to be, the warrior hidden beneath the surface. But she had, and she had done what was necessary. The cost was the loss of perfect anonymity, the return of certain memories, but the gain was the safety and freedom of the town she called home. She still craved peace, but she now understood it wasn't something passively received, it was something actively protected. The quiet old lady of the town held her secrets close, but the community knew, on some level, that she was more than she seemed. Respect for Eleanor wasn't just politeness, it was born of a deep, unspoken understanding of her quiet strength and unwavering resolve. The bullies were gone, justice had prevailed, and the town, once shadowed by fear, now looked towards a brighter future, built on the resilience and courage of its people, sparked by the unassuming woman who had refused to back down. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.